Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Margot Parmenter, and I'm the events coordinator at the Hub City Bookshop in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We're so excited to have you join us tonight for a conversation about author Diana Giovinazzo's new book, Antoinette's Sister. Tonight, Diana will be joined by Christina Baker Kline, author of, among other books, the #1 New York Times best-selling Orphan Train. So here's Diana's book, Orphan Train. Before I hand it over to the authors for the main event, I'd like to introduce our bookshop. The Hub City Bookshop is a full-service, independent bookstore serving the vibrant literary community of upstate South Carolina. We're a part of the larger organization of the Hub City Writers Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to cultivate readers and nurture writers. We do that by publishing original titles through our press, as well as by sponsoring a variety of literary programming in our community, including writers' workshops, book clubs, and author conversations just like this one. If you'd like to find out more about any of our upcoming events, please head to our website at hubcity.org and sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you haven't yet purchased your copy of Diana's book, please know that you can click the green button at the bottom of your screen and buy a signed copy from us at Hub City. Buying the book through our shop is the best way to support the Writers Project and your local bookstore. We also have copies of Diana's first book, The Woman in Red, as well as many copies of Christina Baker Kline's books as well. So please head over. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to head over to our shop where you can purchase all of those books. I'm going to hand it over to Diana and Christina in a moment, but before I do, just one more thing. Please feel free to ask questions. Time will be reserved to answer some of them, and the authors might even answer them as they pop up. So if you have questions, don't be shy. Submit them using the Ask a Question button. Please try not to drop them in the chat. Use the Ask a Question button. It helps us keep track of them a little bit more seamlessly. Without further ado, I'll introduce our authors. Diana Giovinazzo is the co-creator of Wine, Women, and Words, a weekly literary podcast featuring interviews with authors over a glass of wine. Diana is active within her local literary community as the president of the LA chapter of the Women's National Book Association. For more information, visit her website, dianagiovinazzo.com. Christina Baker Kline is published in 40 countries. Her novels have received the New England Prize for Fiction, the Maine Literary Award, and a Barnes & Noble Discover Award, among other prizes, and have been chosen by hundreds of communities, universities, and schools as One Book, One Read selections. Her essays, articles, and reviews have appeared in publications like the New York Times and the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, LitHub, Psychology Today, and Slate. Diana, Christina, thank you both so much for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Diana, it's delightful to be here with you, and I'm so excited to hear you talk about this book after I've just finished it, as I told you. And one of the exciting things about reading this book is that it sends you down, as I said, a rabbit hole of research and to find out the story behind your story. But before we get started on this wonderful book, I want to ask you, because you interview lots of people. This is your job to be the person who's asking the question. So what does it feel like to be on the other end of it?
It sometimes is a little weird, and I try so hard not to be the one to like dominate the conversation, where it's like when you're on the podcast, you're the one who asks all the questions and you try to steer the conversation. So it's like I have to practice self containment, I guess you could say. When it comes to
and in fact, nobody wants you to. I think everybody wants to hear you take over and kind of do oh, by the way, there goes a fire truck. I'm in New York, so you might hear some of those kinds of noises. No, everybody wants to hear, so I hope you'll be talking a lot.
Good. And I'm so happy that, by the way, that you're doing this. I remember, such a thrill to have you on the podcast. And I remember when we had you on, this was still somewhat of a gleam in the eye because we hadn't actually even gotten the cover yet at that point. We had just gotten the title when the last time you and I spoke.
Yeah, I actually want to
do
talk to you about the title and also the cover, which I think is really beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start by telling people what the book is about. Can you give us a little synopsis?
Sure. The story of Antoinette's sister is about Maria Carolina Charlotte, obviously the sister of Marie Antoinette. In case people are wondering, she was the favorite sister of Marie Antoinette. She was also the queen of the Two Sicilies, which is a kingdom that ranges from, or at the time ranged from Naples down to what is now Sicily. She had to take over the rule of the kingdom because her husband was kind of inept and unable to do so. And she had to fight for her sister and risk her kingdom at the same time.
That's good. That's a lovely description. So while we're on that subject, talk about a little bit about the Two Sicilies, because this is something that has interested you for a long time.
Yeah, that kingdom, it was always kind of fascinating for me to have the idea that there's this kingdom that we don't talk about anymore, that is kind of erased from history. They were around for centuries. The Normans were invading it. You had a Middle Eastern population that was living there. And prior to Charlotte, in fact, her grandfather, prior to him, there was Sicily, the kingdom of Sicily that ranged from Naples down to Calabria. And then there was also another Sicily. And that was a Sicily called Sicily as well. And it was the island. And it wasn't until he came along and he took control over both regions that became the Two Sicilies. So it's an interesting name for a kingdom as well. It's not so fancy as some of the other ones, but it's just the Two Sicilies, the kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And it was in existence until 1861 when Italy became unified.
And you had known about the Two Sicilies before you started this book. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'd started the book. I'd known of it, but I didn't have a whole ton of history on it. And when I was in the midst of doing The Woman in Red, I was doing the edits, and my editor was like, I want to know more about the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. You reference it, but I want to get more of the history. So as you know, what we do when we're told to do that, we go down the rabbit hole, and within 24 hours, we become an expert. And I kept getting all these stories about Ferdinand, and we can get to him later on, of what he was doing, all these antics he was pulling. And I thought, my God, who was the poor woman that was married to him? Because he was ridiculous, really. And that's when I came across Maria Carolina Charlotte and her family and her connection and what she did. And I was like, there's a story here that I'm going to have to write.
Well, it's kind of an incredible story. I mean, one of the things that I was struck by reading your book is how many members of the royal family of all royal families, were troubled, were inept, were uneducated, really had no business running these countries. And doesn't that come through in your book so well, that these men, in France, her sister marrying, Louis, these men who just had all these problems, major problems, and that sometimes it took a woman like the woman you described, Charlotte, to come in and take over. So talk about, first of all, her childhood. So talk about the ambition of her mother and these daughters that she raised.
Oh, Marie Theresa was just such a force. She was the OG helicopter mom, as somebody pointed out in a interview I did yesterday. She Courtney, which Kardashian is it? The mom, Caitlyn, whatever Kardashian, the mom Kardashian.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. She's got nothing on Maria Theresa.
Chris,
that's it. You see how much I'm into the pop. I'm more into history than I am popular culture, I suppose. But with Maria Theresa, she was really one of the first rulers to have so many children. We often credit Queen Victoria with her 8 children. Maria Theresa had 16. There were 16 of them. And even though only half of them lived to adulthood, she made sure to place them in all the opportune places throughout Europe. They weren't just children to her. They were assets. So you have Maria Carolina in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. There was Leopold in Tuscany. There was Karl, and his full name was Karl Ferdinand, but because everybody's name was the same, we called him Karl in the book. Mm-hmm. And then he was in Milan. You have Amalia in Parma, and then her daughter, Marie Antoinette, in France. And it was so important for her to be able to use them because she basically ruled through them. There were constant letters going back and forth. So she was always giving advice. And I thought it was kind of funny, the advice that she was just like, I need to know how your household is run. I've got instructions for you on that. If it's not this task, we will fix it. Everything. She needed to know everything, including the daughter's courses. Mm-hmm. When she was having her period and when she wasn't, because she wanted to make sure that there was that heir going forward. And I also found it really brilliant that with all of her daughters, they had this rule within the marriage contract that they would be their regents to their sons until their sons came to power. This way, there was even more of an Austrian influence on these countries.
Well, that was so interesting. And I thought it was interesting, too, that her daughters kind of got in trouble for that, actually, yes. Because the other countries weren't always so happy that there was this Austrian influence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know in Parma, Amalia gets in trouble for it, and she was just kicking everybody out because she was finally having her own say in things. And look at some of the stuff that was happening with Marie Antoinette. A lot of it goes back to to what her mother was wanting. And Maria Theresa even called Italy her Italian colonies. She thought of them as her own.
Well, the mother was so dominant. Even when the daughters grew up, I think they felt very much under her thumb, right, for a long time, and eventually grew to respect her, I think. But even so, it was clear that her influence was very long-lasting over all of Europe. It felt.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, that must have been really fun to discover how far-reaching her influence was.
Oh yeah, it was. It was so interesting and so fascinating. She was also during the time of Catherine the Great. And so that you have these two parallel monarchies going on. And while Catherine the Great is getting all this flack in Europe, you also have Maria Theresa going about her business, making moves, and not getting that same kind of propaganda machine that Catherine the Great was having. So I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, that really is. There were so many little details. For example, you were talking about the high mortality rate of the children. The fact that the custom was to name a subsequent child after the dead child, to give the same name. That was actually a detail for me in my novel Orphan Train, because that was common in the Midwest as well. When the mortality rate was high, they would often name a child. And it seemed strange then, and it seems very strange here, where multiple children were named after multiple children who had died. And in fact, I think Charlotte, right, is the third.
She's the third Charlotte. Maria Carolina. Yeah.
Her two siblings died. It was unbelievable, right?
It's so crazy. And there's legend has it supposedly that happened in my family too, where you had multiple births and the kids were just named one after another, the same names over and over again. So like in Italian families, it's always like the firstborn male is named after the father's father, and then you have the firstborn, the next is after the mother's father, and then it's the father. And we don't really have that in our family line when I went back and researched it. So I found it was kind of interesting. And I kind of proved the theory on that, but it's so odd. For me, just the idea of that, I would not want to be, I'm the only Diana in my family, and I want to keep it that way.
Well, I'm actually the third Christina. My grandmother and my mother are also named Christina, but I had all boys, so it ended with me. So getting back to the story though, you have this very lively girl who with Marie Antoinette is both of them are sort of troublemakers, right? And their mother's always scolding them. And then they grow up to be these very important figures. But that must have been interesting to research and learn about. How did you sort of build the texture of their early lives in this book?
Maria Theresa, she loved her letters, and we can get to the letters too.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about letters.
Yeah, she was always writing letters to her kids. And even though they were in the same palace, she was writing letters to Charlotte, and she was just scolding her about her gossip, about how she has the attention span of a gnat. She was mean to her ladies. She called it mean to calling her governess ogre was my invention, but she was mean to her governess in public. She would call her governess names. She was very spoiled. And so that kind of...
They both were, I guess, right?
Yeah, and that was mostly because of Maria Carolina's influence. She was the older sister. They were 3 years apart, but they were raised as twins, even though they were 3 years separated. And so they always wore the same clothing. They were always together. They were in the same nursery. And so she had a huge influence on Marie Antoinette up until just before their teen years, where Maria Theresa just suddenly decided, you know what, I'm going to separate you two because you're causing too much trouble and you're a bad influence on your sister. And so she actually separated the girls. And she had this tendency with her family, with the 16 of them, where the boys would be raised over in another area and they'd have their own thing. And then the older girls would be on another area. And then you had Marie Antoinette and Marie Carolina on their own, separated from the rest. So they had this own little world all up into themselves. And so,
sorry, go ahead.
So that's why she decided to separate them. And that was such a huge deal for Maria Carolina because they were so close.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, how do you see it that, well, first of all, I'll say we're talking about them, behaving like this, but Marie Antoinette was only 14, right? When she married Louis, and Maria Carolina was only 15, 16. I think? 16.
Yeah, 15, almost 16, right about that age. Yeah.
That's right. Which I thought was pretty astounding. I mean, they were really young to be sent so far away, all on their own, completely on their own, and have to adapt. And I loved the description of how Marie Antoinette, for example, was constantly surrounded by people who were judging her and who they stripped her of her clothing. She had to get dressed in front of people all the time, multiple people, who were sort of treating her like an object, not like a person.
Yeah. That was so, just reading that. I mean, when I read about Marie Antoinette in the books and the letters and whatnot, anything that was about her, I just really got the sense that this was just a sad woman, that she was just, and not even a woman, she was a teenager being put into this position. At first they loved her, this new lovely, teen couple coming in. And then all of this pressure was put on her, and all of this prejudice because she was Austrian, because Austria and France, they had this rivalry at the time. And so she puts Marie Antoinette in this position, and it's unfair what she had to go through. Maria Theresa put a lot on her, and I don't think she could bear the weight of it. And she just came across so sad to me. And that's why in the book, I made sure to get that sadness across, because there was a lot that she had to deal with.
Talk about what she had to deal with. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, you see, there was the one mistress who started spreading rumors about her. That really started it all, where she wouldn't accept her as a friend, because having the mistress of the king as your friend, that may be okay in France, but that wasn't okay in Austria. They kept them to the side, as the proper king should do. And then so that really started the ball rolling. There was the whole diamond affair, which I've studied, and to be honest, I don't even fully understand.
I know. I was reading more about that today too. But basically, it sounds like she didn't do the terrible thing that they accused her of.
Yeah, the terrible things, the spending of the wealth. They accused her of a lot of things. They accused her of molesting her son.
I know, that was crazy. And even the sources I read afterwards said that that was really trumped up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it was too?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. The women that were there that were accusing her about the other things actually got offended that they actually accused her of that. So much of it, just dealing with the treasury and all of that sort of thing, that was beyond her, I think, because she was one of the youngest ones. So, I don't want to offend anybody who is the youngest, but when you're the youngest and you've got 14 children ahead of you and mom's getting kind of old, you don't really get as much attention and you don't get as much, I guess, education as the rest. So she was doing a lot of dancing, lots of partying, and then she gets into the situation where you've got this treasury that's going bankrupt. You've got these nobles that won't pay taxes, and all she wants to do is throw parties and have fun. And I think it was just so much over her, so much more than she could actually handle and comprehend.
That was a huge mess.
Yes.
Why do you think it is, though, that Marie Antoinette is so much better known than Marie Carolina?
Oh, we love our tragic heroines. I think that's one of the things that we really, we have a tendency to go. We know of Anne Boleyn. We know of so many others. And I think for her, just the tragic end of her life, how everything went down, I think that just lends itself to that. And she was a fashionista at the time too, so there was that went along with it as well.
That's right. More than her sister.
Yeah, more so than Maria Carolina. I mean, Maria Carolina, she was fashionable, and she brought in a lot of the French influence prior to the French killing her sister. But she was very much into the French influence of things.
Yeah, definitely. Talk about the title of the book. So this book is about Charlotte. Well, we're calling her Maria Carolina, but I think of her as Charlotte.
Me too.
And by the way, there are so many names, but it's never confusing. You do a really good job of at the very beginning of the book, there's a kind of family lineage, and that's big.
Yes.
I was like, oh no, I'm never going to keep all these names. But actually, you do a really nice job of that. But the book is really about Charlotte, Maria Carolina Charlotte, but you title it Antoinette's sister. Why did you do that?
That wasn't my choice. That was a publisher's choice to do that. But having Antoinette's sister, we all know about Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And we know about some, at least one of her sisters, Mimi. A lot of people know of Mimi, but so few people knew of her sister. And I think with her being Antoinette's, it being Antoinette's sister about Maria Carolina Charlotte, I think she probably would have been okay with it to a certain extent because, they were sisters, and they had such a close bond that she was truly Antoinette's most favorite sister all the way through to the end. And so I think that really that sister relationship was very important within the book. When I was writing it, it became more prevalent and more important to me as I wrote it, as it went along.
Yeah. I can see that. I can totally see that. And I like the title. I mean, I think your publisher is right that it does tell people a lot about sort of what to expect. But what was a title that you had, a working title? Can you tell us that?
The Neapolitan Queen.
That
was the one that I was pushing for.
Yeah, I can see that too. That would have worked well. And then how did the cover happen? Did you have any part in making this sort of mysterious?
That is Grand Central's art department. They have an amazing art department, and they did such a wonderful job with it. And they gave me a bunch of options. There were about 8 different ones, and this was the first one, and it just really stood out. And I was like, I'm going to go with this one.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about what we were briefly raising, the letters. So there are all these letters in the book. Talk about that. Just tell us how that happened.
I love the letters. So I wanted to try to do something a little bit different. Instead of just doing all letters throughout the story, I wanted to be able to intersperse them with the chapters. And Maria Carolina, it became obvious in reading her biography how important letters were to her, where she had her letters kept from her, that she'd get from her mother. She would get letters from Leopold. The Habsburg royal family, they were sending letters back and forth all over the place. So they were very much involved in each other's lives. And she was sending letters to Marie Antoinette, and they were sending letters back. And I really wanted to have that part of it, and also show how involved this family was in each other's lives without having to, but get them there at the palace, because they weren't always there. I don't think Marie Antoinette ever actually went to Caserta, and they were in communication with each other. And it's not like the 20th century. It could be like, oh, here's a text message or a phone call from Marie Antoinette going, oh my God, they're going to kill me. That wasn't something that I could put in the book. So that's why the letters became so important, just to show what was going on in the world around her, and to show this conversation about, with the sisters primarily. I wanted to just boil it down to why, what would you say to your sister? I have a sister, and even a best friend, what would I tell her that I wouldn't tell other people? And that's
Right.
really, there's that really big bit of sisterhood that you don't get anywhere else. And so I wanted to be able to show that what would she talk to her sister about potentially that you wouldn't get from anybody else.
Did you draw on any real letters when you were doing them?
I did. They all of the letters had, all of them but Antoinette's had they were real letters, based on real letters. So there was, quotes and things. I love the one with Leopold and Joseph, where Leopold sends that letter to Joseph going, this is going to be a mess. his basic words, like, we got to prepare ourselves. We need to prepare just to go in there just in case, because we know our sister's temperament. And then we've got this guy who is basically a child. This is, I don't know if I can trust mom on this. And so that was an actual letter that Leopold sent to Joseph. He said a lot of those things in that letter.
So you took some of the real letters and sort of finessed them or changed them a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and quotes that they would put in the letters. Like the letter that Maria Theresa sends scolding her daughter. I took that letter, like the quotes from that letter, and turned that into a letter. And some of the letters that Marie Antoinette sent to other people, I kind of was able to create a letter based on that as well.
Yeah, so I find that so interesting. So how you sort of played with history and what was real. Can you talk a little bit about the liberties you took, and about, well, I want to talk about your process of researching the book in general, but I'm interested to know kind of where you deviated from the facts and or what your philosophy was as you were working, about how much you wanted to be factually accurate.
It's so hard, especially when you're dealing with a real person, because you've got their life and what happens with their life. And at the same time, you've got that arc of a story in the novel that you've got to have. You got to have your climax. You got to have your, build up to it and the release of it. And there's the tension that you've got going on. So that was such a tricky part sometimes to do, and especially with the kids. So we've talked about Maria Theresa having 16 children. Maria Carolina had 17. And that was just so many kids that she had to have, and so many kids to write about. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
And so with the children, with the stuff that happens with their kids is factual. It's all factual. But the way I had to do it with some of the births and whatnot, I had to keep that in with the story alignment of the the tension of was going on. So that was something that I really had to finagle with the story. Of course, when you're writing this, often when I was writing the story, I would have to go back and be like, wait, was she pregnant during this time? What actions could she have? And because how far along is she depends upon what her movements are. So I had to pay a lot of attention to that. So that was kind of interesting to do as a writer. And for
also to think about someone having that many children in that position, she just spent a lot of her life pregnant.
Yeah, and how did that pull on her and her ambition? Because she did have some ambition. Is even though she loved her children and loved being around them, she was still ambitious. Had to be ambitious to be able to take over this control of the country.
Right.
So that was something I really played with.
Yeah, definitely. When you were faced with all this, or when you were sort of in the midst of all this research, how did you make sense of it? And how much research did you do before you could, put it aside and get started with your writing?
It's interesting for this one. So I started this book 2 weeks before the world went on lockdown with the pandemic. So because you couldn't go anywhere, everything was closed. My nose was in a book for everything. So I had to do a lot of research. I've got my library over here on the side with everything's all tabbed and highlighted. And I would go through the books and make sure. And when I do my outlines, I have the outlines broken out by date. So there's also kind of this chronological order that goes in. And when I'm doing an outline, I have the, I'll say, see page such and such in this book. So if I want to go back and reference, something going on during that time that I want to have in the outline, I'll go back to it and do that. So I was doing a lot of that, and a lot of Google Maps. Google Maps really saved my butt for this book, because pick up that little dude and move it around. That was, super important for me while I was creating this story.
When you were writing the story, did you continue to research?
Yes. I'll do some research up front. And then once I feel like I've got enough to create a story, I'll set it down and start writing. But yeah, I would research as I went along. I kind of feel like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I kind of feel like I have to do that, where once I have enough, I have to go back and at least reference, and something will come up, and then I'll have to go back and research more. Like I had to stop at one point because I didn't realize how much of the French Revolution I was going to have to get into, and how much Napoleonic history I was going to have to get into. So I would have to stop and research all this stuff in the French Revolution. I was a little bitter about having to research Napoleon because his books are so thick, and they're such huge books. I'm like, I gotta stop and read this book, because it was just so much of his story that I had to, even just a little bit, to put in, even if it was just one sentence.
Definitely. Oh my gosh. I know. I was thinking too, like, was it intimidating writing in this period, like dialogue, for example? How did you handle idioms and, the kinds of the ways that people spoke back then, and the language you were writing in English, of course, but how did you handle that question?
I like to write my books for the modern audience, and because especially if you want to pick up something that everything's written and spoken in that time period, kind of gets a little boring for the modern audience, because the fact of the matter is we are writing for a modern audience. And I think having like the letters from the biographies and those handwritten stuff kind of helped with that as well. Having those speech patterns that helped with it. And then I was constantly going and checking, if something sounded too modern, how modern was it? Could I use it? Could I not? I've got one of those little
etymology.
Yes, etymology. I've got an extension for that on my browser, so I can just go on there and just type the word in and it'll come up. Because I can't live without that.
Right. That's the best. I agree. They're very useful. What surprised you as you were writing this book? Like, were there things that surprised you in the research, or in the story, building the story itself?
Yeah, I think for me, what surprised me the most was how hard Maria Carolina was trying to save Marie Antoinette. That really comes into play. She was really pushing for Marie Antoinette to move to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. She was even saying, even if it was to stay at a convent, at least she would be safe. And so she was really pushing for that. And then when that didn't work out, she was pushing for her to have her nephew as her ward. Right. She really wanted him to go there too until he died. And so that was something that's how much she was trying to save her sister was just something that really set me back. And then on the same side of it with Antoinette, how many opportunities she had to get away, where she could have gone to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies with her daughter, but it was all or nothing for her. And she had all these opportunities to go, but it wasn't unless the whole family could go.
It's interesting. I mean, it's one of the things that was fascinating to me about reading this is that we obviously know what happens to Marie Antoinette. It's such a famous story. So that. So it has this kind of built-in tension, as you're reading, because you're aware that we're working toward this tragic moment. And I think most of us probably didn't know the fate of of Charlotte, the other sister. But that was fascinating. And I found it very interesting to come at it from this different angle, this one that we haven't really had before.
Yeah. Yeah. It was something that I try to embrace as well. And seeing it from the other side, I thought was really interesting because, we have a tendency when we look at the French Revolution to see it right there in France, but we're seeing it outside of that, French spectrum, and we see what others thought of it as, and they thought of it as like pure anarchy, and they were really, really frightened about what was happening. And Maria Theresa was very much, you rule, it's your God-given duty, that you're ordained by God to rule this, your country, and the thought that they were, could be imprisoned and could be pushed out was just so foreign to so many of them, even though they were playing around with the idea of enlightenment and enlightened monarchy and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think that comes across really well. What was your favorite part of the process of writing the book? Like, what is your, what do you enjoy the most, I guess?
I love the editing part. After I've drafted it, I think the drafting I like the least, because it's like, oh my God, I've got all this mountain to climb yet again. Here I go. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And then it's afterwards, after having this finished lump of clay that I can go and play with and make proper art with, that I enjoy the most.
I love that. And so how long did the book take? What was the whole process like?
This one was actually pretty quick. I think because I was here and by myself, I started in March of 2020 and I ended in August of 2020. That's and I turned and I had that draft, and then a few months later I was starting the editorial process with it.
That's wonderful. So what are you working on now?
I can't share. It's a secret.
Oh. You want to talk about?
No, I can't talk about it right now. We can talk maybe later. You and I off boards, we can talk about it. But yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about it offline. I'll get the skinny from you. What are you reading right now that you're enjoying?
I've been listening to the reading list. I really love that one. And then The Last Duchess. I just started that one recently over the weekend. I finished, what did I finish? Violetta. I finished that. And then I just started The Last Duchess. And of course, I've got, as we all know, it's a pandemic. We've got the dogs and stuff that just assumed that they could come up in the lap. She's the
let's see. Hold her up.
Leo, my dachshund. She had to make her appearance.
She's so cute. What's her name?
Lilo. Yes. So I know it's not necessarily the most professional thing, but this is also, pandemic. And
It's so great. And I actually wanted to tell everyone that I think this must be on your website, and I wanted to make it to, you have your dog. I was going to make a drink, but I ran out of time. Called the Strawberry French. And can you talk about why it's part of this book package?
Oh, I love, they asked me about doing a drink. And I mean, it's just, it feels so luxurious to do, where you have, you know, champagne in and of itself. Even on the most crappiest of days, having champagne is just, it makes you feel better. And the French 75 is actually one of my favorite cocktails. So just, I was first introduced to it in New Orleans, and it was just such a, it's very lovely and light. And then adding the strawberries just adds this level of luxury that you don't otherwise get.
I'm going to make this.
You should. You absolutely should.
Lemon juice, simple syrup, champagne, strawberries, and a twist of lemon.
And a twist of lemon. I have a tendency to forget the lemon, and I'll get a couple sips in, and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot the lemon.
Oh, that's so fun though.
Yes.
I might just have to have a G&T because I don't have all the ingredients, but I will. I am going to get them.
You can get the bottles. You
all right,
get the full champagne bottles. You can do. They have them in little bottles, like, you know, that big or so. And that's what I get. I get like a 3 or 4 pack of those. And
that's a very good idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to keep them. And also, you could freeze the strawberries once you puree them, right?
Absolutely.
I'm definitely getting into this. Okay, so we were going to talk about her husband. Talk about that, because you said we'll come back to that later.
Yes, Ferdinand. You can't help but love Ferdinand now, can you? He was such a character. I had so much fun writing him.
Yeah.
He was, you know, it goes back to Carlos, and Carlos had his 3 sons. There's Philip, Carlos, whatever, because I don't know. There, again, we go through so many. Everybody had to be the name the same thing. So we've got his son, Carlos. We'll just call him Carlos Jr. here.
Yes.
And then we've got Ferdinand. And it was really sad, the story with Philip and Philip's, his illness, the way that they treated it. And they kept him apart from everybody else and only brought him out for special occasions. Was
it Down syndrome? I couldn't quite tell.
That's kind of, they didn't say, and they put it, the symptoms that they described for him almost line up for Down syndrome. And the way that they classified mental, you know, issues like that, maladies like that, was kind of barbaric, in my opinion. I would say definitely barbaric, in my opinion, because they refer to him as an imbecile. And there's no way that's not, it's just wrong. And so I kind of felt bad for Philip in that sense. But his son Carlos became his heir. Mm-hmm. And then you had Ferdinand, and Carlos, the king, Carlos, was very paranoid about his sons coming down with the same maladies as Philip. And so he made sure that they were outside getting as much vitamin D as possible, running healthy exercise. He was all about that, and he really pushed that on his sons. And I think for Ferdinand, it went to the extreme because Ferdinand was left at a young age, too, younger than Charlotte. He was only a couple years older than Charlotte. And he was maybe, I want to say, it was probably about 13 or so when Carlos went to Spain and became the king of Spain with his next son. And he was left there with a regent who took advantage of the situation, who was just like, oh, you don't need to worry about this stuff. Go play. Go shoot some deer or some boar. Go play fishmonger. Go play at your inn. And he encouraged him to do that and not rule. And so they just assumed that when Charlotte came in, she would do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so you have this guy who wasn't given the tools. And that really, for me, it felt like it came down to he wasn't given the tools to be able to function as an adept ruler. But he loved the people of Naples. There's no doubt about that, where he enjoyed going, because they call him Le Re Nozze, or Nozone, because Nozone means the big nose king, basically. But they also called him Re Lezione, which was also the beggar king. And that was because he liked being about the people. He would dress up in common clothes, go out and spend time with the people. He had his weekly or daily chess matches with the old men over hanging out by the sea, playing chess with them. That was so common for him. He loved that. He loved the common people. Ferdinand of Napoli was something that he was trying to achieve. He wanted to have this area that was unified with a common income that everybody could have, which is very modern. And when you look at it from the modern sense, but he was still very much a part of that. And so there was so much more to him than the stereotype that he just didn't care. And so I
thought you conveyed that really well. And also that her feelings for him changed over time. And you could see her kind of wrestling with like actually caring for him and understanding him. And there was that scene where he was selling fish, down by the wharf, and she came upon him, and you sort of had this sense that he would have been content in a very different life. Like he had a sort of wastrel sensibility as the king, but that he just would have liked to be busy, maybe selling fish in a market, or, having a much simpler life around people.
Yeah.
I love that line. You said, I couldn't tell she said, I couldn't tell if my husband was insane or simply a misunderstood savant.
And that's true. But then, because that was something that I was looking at too, where it's just like, is he insane or is he just, purely misunderstood? The jury, all these centuries later, is still out on him.
But he was, I think people agree, a bad leader. I mean, not an effective, without Charlotte, certainly he was not an effective leader. And she was very controversial at the end I mean, as time went on too. Talk about that. Like, you're creating this character who's intent on doing good and doing well. But she, she favors her home country, and there are things she sort of gets in trouble with. How did you end up feeling about her as a person?
That's so interesting. Well, with her historical record, she was doing all of these wonderful things, promoting her people and all of that, and really helping out and really being, very forward thinking. But once Maria Antoinette dies, there's just like, you can see within the historical record, there's just this like switch where everything changes, where she starts focusing more on the military, where she starts raising taxes, where she's just like, well, this Enlightenment stuff got us nowhere. We have all of these refugees from France coming in, which was really interesting to read, that they had this refugee crisis going on. Meanwhile, there's all this refugee crisis going on from Syria now, going on today from Ukraine. And when the Republicans were at the time complaining about refugees coming into the United States from South America, and they're like, which ones are terrorists? She was saying the same stuff, like, which one of these are terrorists? Because terrorism was a coin during that time period because of Napoleon. And so that was something really interesting to go into. And I think as a person, I still respected her. And I feel like, when you have this tragedy, such a great tragedy, people change. And I think that it changed her. And I felt sorry for her in the end. I really did. And that was, I think, in the end, I felt sorry for her. And I also, very much after writing this book, I'm very much a big believer in democracy and the people's right to choose, as opposed to monarchies. I am not a monarchist anymore. Yeah, I'm not into...
Were you a monarchist?
A little bit. It was like, oh, the queen and monarchies. There's that whole, like, I think so many of us here in the United States have that whole wistful thing because we don't have a king or a queen. But yeah, seeing all of this, I'm like, you know what? This probably, we've got our problems, but I think everybody having their say is probably a lot better, especially when you have the whole divine right thing going on, and Ferdinand is the ruler as opposed to somebody else that the people chose.
Well, that's what I was saying. I was so struck by how idiotic some of these rulers were and how utterly uninterested in ruling. And the idea that it's not someone who even wants the job, it's just someone who's the next in line, for the job. It's kind of
because God made it that way, which is something that when you hear the politics, spouting off in certain areas where they're like, this is God's will that this should be that way. That scares me because I'm like, I just wrote a book about what happens with God's rule. And
totally.
Yeah, that maybe, the whole freedom of choice thing might be a better option. I'm just saying, that's a bit too controversial.
Well, I was struck reading the book about, at what's going on in the world today and how, you were writing about things that really do make the reader reflect about the world. Like, for example, inoculations.
Yeah.
You described these tragic, I had just read today about how Ben Franklin's child died because he didn't inoculate him because they thought he was a little sickly and they thought he was too weak. He was 4 years old. He died of smallpox and he regretted it and was then a huge proponent of, vaccinations. And I was thinking about in your book, there was also this tragedy with vaccination, right?
Yeah.
And how much that reflects sort of the way people think today too. I mean, we're still human. We're still the same kind of humans. And I also thought in other ways too, did you, as you were writing the book, were you kind of thinking about the world today at the same time? And do you think that's part of the function of, writing about the past?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I feel like connecting to the past through historical fiction really connects us to our ancestors and to society previously to not only see how things went, but also to feel what this all felt like. We get a glimpse of that. And that played such a huge role because I was writing this during the pandemic and the talks of vaccinations and all of that coming up. And one of my closest friends is a public health microbiologist. And if she is watching this, she's going to cheer me that I got her title right. Because the longest time I was calling her our epidemiologist, she's like, no, not yet. Public health microbiologist. And so she's involved with all of these vaccinations. And she was the one, we'd always joke around with her that if the zombie apocalypse were to break out, we are on her phone tree to let us know if we have to run because of the apocalypse. And so I would actually start asking her questions like about the science of this, she and I got into the history of inoculations versus vaccinations, because there are two different things. Inoculations, you actually get like a live virus from someone and give it to a small amount of it to somebody else. So that was still kind of risky.
Very, yeah. The idea of taking that that terrifying piece of the actual disease itself and injecting it. Yeah.
And that had a hand in the fate for Maria Carolina, because there were two others that were supposed to marry Ferdinand before her. And one of them, she got the inoculation and she ended up dying because of it.
Right.
And so that was, and then the next one in line, she didn't get the inoculation. And she ended up getting smallpox. The legend has it that she got it from kissing the sarcophagus of a family member when they went down to the crypts. That's what the legend says. And she got smallpox and died on her way to Naples.
That was crazy detail. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something that was, I guess, goes to the surprising bit of it. Because if that were the case, if either of those two women had lived, then we would be having a very different discussion about Maria Carolina being the Queen of France, because she was originally supposed to be the queen.
Yeah, I mean, their fates were so determined by the high mortality rate, essentially, so often, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I found it a very, cinematic book, like very fast-paced and colorful. Have you thought about who would play these characters if this were going to be made into, a series or a.
Oh, yes, I have. I love that you asked that, because we always like to ask that of authors on the podcast, and then I would and then once I started getting that question, I was like, wow, this is kind of a little, we were kind of mean to them because we're putting them on the spot. But I have thought for this one. There's Justin, I want to say Justin Baldini. He was in Jane the Virgin.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would make a good Ferdinand. Tobias Mackenzie, I think, for John Acton. I think.
Okay. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about John Acton, so we'll do that in a second.
I don't know for Marie Antoinette who would play her, but whoever played Charlotte. Whoever played Charlotte would also have to play Marie Antoinette, because they look so much alike. Even in their adulthood. Yeah. They, at one point, there's some of the nobility that were close to Marie Antoinette fled to Naples after Marie Antoinette's death. And one woman actually fainted upon seeing Maria Carolina because they looked so much alike.
Wow.
The only difference was the hair color. That's how close they resembled each other. So they would have to be the same person who played both of them.
Or they could be sisters, or they could,
sisters. They could be real life twins. I mean,
yeah.
The door's open, yeah.
But wait, so you haven't gotten someone in mind for Charlotte?
No, I don't. It's so weird. My main characters, I never really have somebody specifically in mind for them. I mean, Kirsten Dunst was really great when she played her in Sofia Coppola's movie.
Right.
So maybe somebody along those lines.
Yeah.
Looks wise.
Yeah. I was looking at their portraits. It was interesting to see. Like, they were very attractive.
Yeah. They're very, the Habsburgs, Maria Theresa's line, they were a very good looking bunch.
Mary says maybe Meryl Streep's daughters, Mamie Gummer.
Oh, that would be a good one. I like that. Because isn't she's playing the Gilded Age right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right. Okay, so John Acton, what do you think? Do you think she was having an affair with him?
I don't know. Because there's two trains of thought.
We should tell the readers our viewers, I mean, who he is.
So he came in, he was English, and he worked for Leopold, and he comes in and he's older. He is everything that Ferdinand isn't. He's smart. He's well read, well spoken. He's traveled around, and he's very, it's obviously there was some sort of connection. Like there was some sort of allure to that, where somebody like her who likes to read, who was very well educated, and she sees this dashing older guy, that there's got to be something, there's something there. The girl's kind of attracted to that. And he goes from being the head of her military, because the head of her military was just a goofball, as most of it was prior to him coming in. And then he moves his way up and becomes prime minister. And she really, she really trusts him. He becomes her right-hand man, so to speak. And at the same time, there's all this negative press going on. There's all this slander. There was a rumor that him and the viceroy of Sicily were fighting over Maria Carolina. And when that guy died, they tried to blame Acton for it, even though they were in two separate areas. They were like, oh, he had somebody poison him. And he got so much slander that it was like, there had to be a reason why he stuck around. Like, he didn't have to stay. Did he truly love Naples? Did he truly, or was it the fact that he loved her? What was it that kept him there? And so I just kind of presented it as I saw it, where I'm like, I don't know for sure whether or not they did. The biographer says that she didn't, but yet there's others that were like, yeah, no, she did, because she did have affairs.
Right.
But I don't know. It's something I want to let the readers decide whether or not what they think of it.
That's good. I know. I think I was left with that feeling that it was, sort of, you had to kind of make your own decision about it.
And I love doing that to readers where it's like I don't spell it all out for them, because this way they can think about it for themselves and draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is a great way to end, actually. I think we're at exactly an hour almost here.
Wow.
I know it's gone so
fast.
I know, so fast. But what an achievement for you. I mean, I don't think I did more than, cook and maybe write an article during COVID. But like, for you to have got this book that came out of it is just amazing. And you must be I'm very proud.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's so great. And I feel like I learned a lot. And also it just sent me off, as I said, on this journey that was really fun.
Oh, I love it. And I love the journey in the rabbit hole. And I know on my website, I've got the whole selected bibliography on there with all sorts of other books and resources that I used as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, to have a website with lots of resources and information, I think is such an extra. Are you doing mostly, and by the way, Hub City, come back and we'll, we all take a talk. Are you doing many live events or any, or?
Yeah, I've got a few live events. I've got one coming up March 13th with a local bookstore, Belcanto Books. Oh, and one that we just set up with Barnes & Noble in Orange County at the one in Aliso Viejo. I'll be doing a live event there.
Oh, that's great. And then Zooms, I guess. Of
course. Oh, I'm always available for Zooms.
That's great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. I don't want to interrupt to end the conversation, but because it's such a wonderful conversation, I really enjoyed listening. It was an honor to have you both. I just want to remind our viewers that this link, there will be a recording of this entire conversation that will remain here at this link. So if you have friends who wanted to make it tonight but weren't able to, or just people you want to share the conversation with, share Diana's book with, please feel free to share this link and it will live here. It will also live on our Hub City YouTube page, so you can find it there for a couple different places of accessibility. Diana, congratulations on this wonderful book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Christina, thank you so much for being such a wonderful conversation partner.
Of course, it was so fun. And everybody buy her wonderful book.
Oh, absolutely.
Bye.
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 Good evening.
Bye.
Bye.